good afternoon. Welcome to the latest installment of Power Huddle, Inside the Minds of ESG Gurus. I am Heidi Friedman, a partner and co-chair of Thompson Hine's ESG Collaborative. Happy Monday. Thanks for joining us. During this monthly series, I chat one-on-one with innovative ESG execs. These unscripted discussions will examine how these company execs from various industries are actively paving the way as ESG trendsetters and championing pragmatic ESG strategies to align with business values while building a sustainability framework to advance their company's ESG goals and practices. Joining me today is Kristina Beifus. Hopefully I said that right.
Got it.
Okay, Director of Compliance and Sustainability at American Greetings. She leads the organization's compliance, strategy, and sustainability initiatives while ensuring regulatory consistency, mitigating risks, and integrating ESG principles into her company's business practices. With over a decade of experience in global trade, that will come in handy these days, medical device and consumer product compliance, Kristina specializes in regulatory compliance, sustainability, and risk management. She develops policies, programs, and training to foster a strong compliance culture. Welcome, Kristina. So excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited.
True guru. Okay, so first, a few things out of the way. Today's program is being recorded and will be available to view in our library of recordings on Thompson Hine's YouTube channel. This presentation is intended for general information only. I'm sorry, for the general information of individuals and organizations on matters of current interest. The thoughts and opinions being expressed today are those of individual panel members only and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the panel members, clients, employers, affiliates, or Thompson Hine. The content should not be taken as advice, as the views expressed are for informational purposes only. And if you have questions or comments, please put your chat to Heidi Friedman, and please go ahead and put your comments and questions in the chat. And I would be super happy to try to ask Kristina those in our short time together. So Kristina, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your ESG journey, because I think yours is unique in a way, and I'd love you to share that.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I started in compliance, product safety, social audits, responsible sourcing, really that unglamorous but essential part of responsible business. And then I pivoted to ESG. I say lack of willing participants, right? Because it really was, there was just sort of like a white space. I think as a lot of our partners were starting to ramp up, there was a need in the business. And I think as the expectations around corporate responsibility evolved, my role expanded to include sustainability, strategy, climate risk, and stakeholder engagement. So I've helped build the ESG governance structures from the ground up and leading the cross-functional work that blends really the regulatory, the operational, and the strategic ESG priorities to embed it, not just bolt it on to the business.
Right. And I think coming from compliance is probably one of the best foundations you can come from, because basically it's an extension of compliance anyways. And the difference is with compliance a lot, it's sort of reactive, looking back, that kind of thing. And here I think the shift is to proactive risk mitigation. And so it's all within a compliance lens. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're much more connected than most people realize. Having goals, ESG goals, I think to your point, are very forward looking, where compliance is mitigation in a lot of ways. And I think when you put those together, you create a stronger program in both ends, because they're going to, I think, just meld together in a lot of ways. But without governance and controls, ESG is just marketing, right? And so as ESG reporting gets more regulated and more scrutinized and more complex, we're going to apply the same principles that we do to other regulated products and audit requirements. So I think it's, defining clear ownership, trying to document everything, make it auditable into your process. And then, make sure that it's not just something that's living in its own corner, right?
Hmm.
You want it to be something that's operational, that's built into,
It's alive and
yeah,
changing.
from
Yeah.
the top down and bottom up. It has to be integrated, um,
Yeah.
especially if you want to be credible, right? And so trying to be authentic in this is making it make sense to your business. And I think that from our experience, that's something that is visible, right? That authenticity in our program.
Yeah, and going back real quick to your audit comment, I do think that that's interesting because we are having a shift to third-party audits, and I'm finding that people are struggling with whether to do that or not because of the lack of the SEC regulations now, and whether that it still makes sense to kind of go through an audit process. Now, you guys are, it sounds like you are. Can you describe how you're tackling that audit?
Yeah, I think from, you know, again, because we're a private company,
Right.
so it's I think it'd be very easy to get in a situation where you're constantly playing catch up if something doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily apply to you. But I think where you again, combining compliance and sustainability together allows that view of, what's the risk if you don't take action. And I think that's the way that we've really built this program. And think about this program as it continues to evolve is the risk of non-action. And so that's influenced
Mm.
us from the onset to think about, okay, just because we're not a public company, what is the most robust requirement that could be asked of us, depending on future state of the company someday, or, bondholders and whatever that might look like. But also state level regulations and requirements we've
Right.
seen in California. And so that's one situation that has proved really well for us, was planning to have information that's tied out, right? From the very onset, we started documenting where the data came from and who provided it to us, and any sort of assumptions that came through, because you have to have data to know if it's good or bad data. It's kind of
Of
the
course.
And so for us, it's sort of the first step is, where do you get the data and who gave it to you, and to see where we can make those improvements. And that's honestly where how the auditability of our program has continued to evolve, is into a inventory control management. So we're knowing where everything comes from, and so it's really easy when we do move forward with our assurance that we're going to have to do for California later this year. We're well aligned for that.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like it, and I think what's interesting is you're talking about lining to shareholders stakeholder value, which
Mhm.
is still kind of and should be the driving force, and I think that some people are challenged in this environment. And tell me a little bit about like the status of your materiality assessment and the life of that. Obviously, if you were EU compliant, you'd be doing a double materiality, but that's getting delayed too. So I'm just curious how you are continuing to make sure that you're aligning your program to stakeholders.
Yeah, I think, well, we have many stakeholders. I think, and when you think about retailers, you think about customers, and the private equity. And so it's interesting because they're all a little bit different in what their, I think, underlying expectation might be, or the reasons for that. But at the end of the day, because I think we've approached it in such a way where we just have to make it make sense to the business, and kind of
Mhm.
tying it back to that authenticity, um, we can kind of go through the same exercise and answer the questions for everyone. And my view of a materiality assessment is, it's much more Google Doc than PDF, right? Like, as businesses evolve, your shareholders expectations and risks will evolve as well. And so that really means your materiality assessment has to continue to do that. um, we when we started the program at the very beginning, it was very much in a room with all the stakeholders and operational leaders, thinking about what the greatest risk to our business was. And in that time, and it still is true, we realized, paper is the greatest raw material that
Yeah,
we're using.
yeah.
Um, and it impacts us in every way. So for us, the intent was, how do we become the most responsible steward of the raw material we use the most? And then that's influenced all of our goals, and has lent itself to innovation of product, and set us up in a way, I think, that now we're starting on our decarbonization journey.
Mm.
We're able to capitalize, I think, on a lot of those shifts we made earlier. Um, But I do think that double materiality is also important for private companies, even if it's not necessarily a
I agree.
requirement,
Yeah.
because you're looking at not just how the issues affect you, but like how your operations affect people and communities and the
Exactly.
ecosystems. Um, and I think it's just a great way, you look at everything in the lens of risk and opportunities. And I think that the double materiality, that's the way to figure out your opportunities, right? Even if it's not mandatory to disclose them, it's going to help you make better long-term decisions. I think when you have that fuller lens.
I could not agree more. And I love the fact that you said it's a Google Doc, not a PDF. That's so true. I mean, I think, I mean, one thing about ESG, and you can call it sustainability, you can call it corporate responsibility or whatever, but it changes every day.
Yeah.
And so you have to keep it alive and well. And what I love is that you guys are staying committed. And so we are in an anti-ESG or an ESG pullback or whatever you might want to call it within the United States. Even the EU is slowing down a little bit. We certainly have the state, things that we talked about. But you, like many of our clients, American Greetings, like many of our clients, are staying committed to their stakeholders and they're doing what they think they should be doing. Tell me a little bit about the thought process around that. Have you guys had lots of conversations around whether to pull back or not, or whatever you're willing to share on those kinds of fronts?
Yeah. I don't think any conversations ever for us about pulling back because it's so
Oop.
issues haven't gone away. They've just gotten more politicized, I think, right? And so we just shift the framing of it. We talk about supply chain continuity and operational risk, cost savings, and resilience. Again, kind of that idea of meeting stakeholders where they are without diluting the message. And so I always relate it back to, I don't need someone to participate and engage because of altruistic reasons. If it's not to better the planet and it's just for cost savings, that's fine, because the ultimate goal is us getting there. And I think that reframing it to just sort of meeting people where they're at.
Right.
But as a company, we're still very much committed to it because it's just good business. We're going to
that is like the best tagline ever. It's just good business. It really is, and it doesn't matter what you call it because it's gone through so many iterations. But yeah, I mean, and you do have to meet people where they are. I mean, I think every business is a little bit different. You guys are so on some level, even though you're not direct to consumers, sometimes you are in consumers' hands so much, and so you do have to listen to that constituency probably, which can be very loud.
Yeah. And it isn't like the optics are very real, but so are the impacts. And so I think for us, that's kind of what it comes down to is, our everything we do is sort of guided by our mission, vision, and values. And
I love that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people might think that seems too altruistic, but like American Greetings created the Care Bears and strawberry shortcake, so it is on brand from that perspective as well, I think.
I love strawberry shortcake.
Right?
I'm sorry. I was like, what? One of my kids, I think it was Morgan, was obsessed with straw. Anyways, go ahead.
We'll digress.
Yes.
Yeah, but so I think from that perspective, again, when we talk about just our brand identity and making it authentic, this is very authentic to us, right?
Yeah.
In this path, it would seem strange, right? If we weren't caring about the environment, if we weren't caring about our communities and the broader, I think, just impact of our product. I think it's focusing on the connections like that, right? It really is, you have to think about the net positive impact you make on society.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at it that way in terms of our product offerings and our company and the history of our company, it's really clear how it just makes sense and it's tied in. It's not something that's extra that we've just started.
Yeah, I feel like if you think about a Care Bear and the representation of a Care Bear, you're right. That's like exactly, but like mission, vision, and values should be driving everything a company does. And to me, that's what the materiality assessment really gives you. So it's kind of aligning the two of those. And the other thing I really like that you've talked about, Kristina, is just data collection. Because if you don't track it, you don't treasure it, and it is the main thing we need to do, I think, here in this environment. And so talk a little bit about your data tracking process and maybe how you use that to make sure you're prepared, you know, for any anti-greenwashing or, you know, greenwashing initiatives or things like that.
To be honest, and don't overpromise, you know, don't use vague language, and then just making sure that you're able to back up claims with data. So, you know, keeping in mind that it's not about perfection, just progress. So being honest and being specific, because I think greenwashing we see usually comes from trying to look perfect instead of showing the real progress. And it doesn't need to be, you just need to be credible, right? And so I think for us, again, because, you know, I'm the same person with compliance and sustainability, so able to align a lot of what processes we're doing for compliance into sustainability. And so we have claims assessment forms, right? So anytime there's a product claim, we're leveraging the same process we did for, you know, review of warnings or product safety claims. And that's to say, provide us all of the you know, the raw materials that are being used, provide us all of the information, the supporting information, provide us what you would like to say. And then, you know, my team will look at it and say, if you can say that based on the substantiation you've provided. And then we have it as a file. And for us, because we do have, you know, consumer inquiries, we do have retailer inquiries, and not every year they care about the same things. So it's sort of, you know, they'll come all at once asking a question about a particular topic and then perhaps not at all. So for us, it's how can we get that information at the very beginning? And honestly, if I wouldn't say it under oath, I wouldn't say it, right? So I think that's kind of the thought there, is that red face test is if you have to spend a lot of time explaining why you said something, then you shouldn't say it.
Exactly. It's mostly about transparency too. Like, you know, explaining how you got to these numbers and how you calculated them. And I can't tell you how many times we go through reports and ask the follow-up question of like, tell me how you got this number. And, you know, people are like, what? You know, I'm like, then you can't use it, or, you know, and so I think that your process is working well. And I think that I love, it's not about, what did you say about progress? Something you not about perform, about progress, which I thought was
it's not about perfection.
right. I'm like, I started writing it down. I'm like, I need a t-shirt that says that. That's like perfect. But it is, it's like, you know, some people are like running, and I think a lot of people ran out in front and now are like peeling back a little bit, you know. And it's not about it, as I say to my kids about a lot of things, this is a marathon, really, actually, for almost all companies. It's not a sprint, so you got to take it in stride. But you guys have had a ton of successes, so talk to me a little bit of what you think your greatest success is in this space.
Yeah, so I think that for me, I think I'm really proud of building a governance that works, right? So I think it went from being, particularly at our company, an idea that was loosely supported, to having structure and accountability and executive engagement. And I'm proud of the way I think that we've approached and are approaching climate risk. So we're doing the work, the regulatory prep, the risk mapping, the stakeholder engagement. Like, we're in the thick of it right now. And with the support of our consultants, we've taken a really complex and evolving requirement and translated it into practical and business first strategy that's setting us up for success. So we're really trying to figure out, you know, from the requirements that we're going to be obligated to in California, how do we make this the most usable tool to kind of every area in our business and supply chain? Like, how do we expand the sort of scenario analysis that we're going through to take into consideration not just, you know, the areas or the buildings that are under our operational control, but those that are maybe 3PLs, right? Maybe geographical regions, because again, of how we distribute our product, and that we're in over 40,000, retail stores.
Wow.
If there is some sort of climate related event that takes out and impacts an infrastructure of an area, right? That's a real impact. So for us, it's thinking about how we can sort of build this process and ask the questions up front, so that way it's helpful and usable for the purposes of California and scenario analysis, but because then it also becomes a living tool that the business can use and find value in outside of just, the ESG function.
Right. It's not just about complying with California. It's about what's good for business at the end of the
Exactly.
day. Because, on some level, who knows what California is going to be, and there's a million other states
Right.
following. But, and so I would say, what's the counterpart to that? What's your biggest challenge right now in this space?
I think you mentioned it, data quality and systems
Okay.
integration. I mean, we have so many valuable insights across our organization, but pulling it together in that sort of consistent and auditable way is still tough. We've invested in ESG software over the past year, so we are again in the thick of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And with that is clarifying roles and data ownership, and then making sure that again our reporting aligns with regulatory and stakeholder expectations. So it's not just checking the box. We want to build something that's consistent and scalable and defensible, right? And so to your point, we really looked for a system that would allow us to create that inventory docket. So we know where every piece of data came from, and it's tracked. And so we have all of that mapped across the board. And
Mm-hmm.
because as we're going through this, we're looking towards what is going to make this exercise easier when we're going through assurance, whether it's limited or reasonable down the line, is trying to kind of put the steps in place now, so it's not as burdensome, as we continue to move forward.
Sure, like anything compliance related, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have to. I am going to ask you something that comes up pretty regularly, which you said you bought ESG software.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're willing to share any of your process around that, I always tease that I think I get 45 emails a day with someone trying to sell me either ESG consulting or ESG software. I have probably sat on 35 calls with demonstrations. Just curious, because we get this from clients a lot, sort of your process in selecting your software and how you got there.
Yeah. So it was a really iterative process, quite
Okay.
honestly, and one that we worked with our IT team with. And in fact,
Mm-hmm.
they almost led. We had an RFP, right? So we started with, I think, about 26 different.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, from sort of just corralling, right? Like ones that perhaps retail partners were using, ones that other stakeholders might be using, ones that we've seen at conferences, and then mapped all those, right? We identified I think we had 13 attributes that were really critical to the success of our business, what we really needed the solution to provide, and we ranked those as well. And then it was, as we had these meetings over, quite honestly, maybe 6 months, it was, tracking it and seeing like who were the top 4 or 5 that met the most, right?
Okay.
That met the most of our criteria. And then we would proceed, right? And then we
Okay.
could have a more specific conversation to understand what, how they could integrate with our systems, and also the structure of our organization. We don't have a large compliance or sustainability
Right.
team, so we can't have a system that is going to take a singular person to manage all day long. And so it's interesting, I say, because once we got down to, we felt like we had the system. And then when you start getting more and more specific and sort of looking at all the ways in which it would work with your system, we realized, wow, I think this is bigger than what we need. Like
Mm.
it's too much for what we need, in the sense of our process isn't that complex, right? And what we need to really solve for, the system was going to make it more complicated on our end to try and
Okay.
figure out. And so and I'd say the 11th hour, we went with one that was never even our initial, right? We vetted them because we found them through, through our third party and through other relationships, and they had a, kind of add-on system that was exactly what we needed for future-proof reporting. And so I think, again, it's keeping an open mind that just because you start the process and maybe you find one that you think is really going to be it, it's keeping an open mind throughout it. Because again, like when you think about the Google Doc and everything continues to evolve, if you start a process to find, the system a year ago, you can have a very different program. And that's where we found ourselves, was when we started the exercise to when we were ready to really issue and start moving forward. We were very different. We had a very different program.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's super helpful, actually. And I love the fact that you kind of, IT almost led the process because their expertise is essential in that kind of situation. And your whole right sizing is important. I mean, it's very different as a private company, for example, to a global company that's going to have SEC reporting one day potentially in all the things. So I like, that's a helpful run through. So, all right, let's get out our crystal balls here. We're about halfway through the year, Kristina. What do you predict on the ESG front over the next 6 months?
Well,
it's a loaded question. I understand.
The tea leaves are a bit fractured at the moment, I think. But I think, hope is not a strategy, I know, but I'm thinking, right, returning more to pragmatism. And I think the way in which, because I think of the fatigue around ESG, and as I mentioned, a lot of companies are starting to reframe and think about how to build it into the organization. So that way it can't be pulled out just as an ESG. So it's reframing it. I think it'll be reframed more as enterprise risk and business value.
Yes.
I think really especially when you get involved with the climate disclosure rules and sort of intensifying supply chain changes. I think companies are going to start investing more in systems and internal controls and credible data. So treating it more like it is audit, right? I think you'll see more of building audit programs around to control the data, because that is so specific to the company, right? It's so tied to the KPIs can be what matters to you. And I do think that the leaders who've continued to be doing the work quietly and consistently are going to stand out in a good way, right? I think that it's going to be noted. And
100%.
Yeah,
We
momentum.
almost have like a pause right now to kind of get your ship in order a little bit. I guess my one worry is that the states are so inconsistent that it just creates more chaos within the United States about what gets enacted here and not. I mean, on some still think the global companies are going to drive it because there's global reporting that's going to continue to flow down no matter what happens here. But that's a challenge. But I like exactly what you said. I think that's really important. And I think the companies like you guys, like American Greetings, that are getting it in shape, making sure you have the software, making sure you have the audit process, making sure you have the right data. You're doing all this while these different pieces are kind of flowing and in flux. You're just going to be better served, down the road. And I think with ERM or enterprise risk management, you're exactly right. But it's, again, those that are focused on it as an opportunity maybe are going to capitalize.
Yeah. And I think to your point about the states, I do think, for us, we look at it as like the greatest common denominator, right? The sort of like, where is, what, by complying with X, are we going to cover most of our area, right? Even if it's not applicable to us now, sort of what's the goalpost that we could be asked for? Because for me, right, I don't want to have to continue to recreate the wheel.
Right.
So let's just figure out what we're very likely going to be asked for next year, and then work towards that as the goal. Because in the middle, everything's likely going to start catching up.
Not about perfection, but about progress.
Yes.
Right. So, man, I'm impressed with you. Anyways, before we go, now you have this huge job with buckets of work with between trade and compliance and sustainability and adorable children. But what do you like to do in your free time, Kristina? When
Oh
you're
gosh.
not doing all things sustainability?
Right. I was going to say I have an almost 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, two boys. So my free time is often, messy and chaotic. I'd love to say that, it's filled with a lot of things, but I think my husband and I are really in this phase where we're trying to soak up as much time as possible with them while they're similarly in a phase where they want the same. And I know
That
it's
does
fleeting.
pass.
So that does tend to be my priority, but I think when free time prevails, I love reading and being outside, but in that sort of sun in your face, going for a walk and not camping or yard work kind of way. Um, I think it's a really,
I'm 100% with you so
know what I
far
mean?
completely.
You have to be really clear so people don't think you're outdoorsy.
Yes, I'm like I'm outdoorsy and like drinking wine on a patio outdoorsy kind of
Yes.
person.
Yes. And then just
Exactly.
spending time with my sister and my friends is always something that fills my bucket.
Awesome. Well, I cannot thank you enough. That concludes today's discussion. Again, this webinar was recorded and will be available to view in our library of recordings on Thompson Hine's YouTube channel. We encourage you to visit our YouTube page and subscribe to stay up to date, as well as our Environmental Laws podcast, wherever you find your podcasts. We want to thank all of you for attending today's program and extend a very, very, very special thanks to Kristina for sharing your insights. I could not have learned more, and I just love you're very methodical, but yet super strategic. And it really was lovely to hear your thoughts today. And I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Heidi. This was great.
All right, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.